Hey, everybody. My name is Jake Milstein. Welcome to our webinar panel today. We're going to be talking about InfoSec budgeting for public sector organizations. And man, what a year it's been. I was just talking
Mm.
to one organization that, just got a heads up that the tax base is going to be worse than it was at one point. And that's not good. That's not good at all. So, what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about how to budget and 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 we'll spend the next hour talking about it. Now, if you haven't been to our events before, you got to know that the chat is on the right. And we love questions. I love interrupting these fellas to ask your questions when they come up. Also, there are a lot of people who do chat and do ask questions. So there's a little bell in on the top of your chat, and if it has a little cross through it, it means it's on mute. If it doesn't have a little cross, it means it's not on mute. Sometimes the system defaults to not on mute, and if it goes bloop bloop bloop, you might be annoyed. So anyway, you can mute it if you want. Also, everybody come in will get a recording of this. We also will have a couple of handouts. One of them is the deck, so we will email out the deck from this webinar. And on top of that, there are a couple things that Mike's planning to talk about, and we'll make sure you get those documents as well. If you don't know us, Critical Insight defends critical infrastructure against cyber attack. We help organizations prepare for an attack with incident preparedness and risk assessments and pen tests. Um, we help them detect an attack quickly, and we help people respond decisively to an attack. We have security operations centers in a couple of different places, now more distributed than ever. Thanks, COVID. And that's what we do. A lot of our customers and a lot of our clients are in the public sector, partially because of Mike Hamilton. Mike is one of the founders of the company. He is our CISO, and he's the former CISO of the city of Seattle. Fred Langston is co-founder. He's our chief product officer and has worked with state and local organizations all around the country, but especially on the West Coast. John Traeger is joining us today. He's a cyber strategy consultant and the former CIO of the city of Issaquah in Washington State. And he is a very interesting individual because he actually went from being an elected city council member to, hey, I want to go work for the city. So, John is helpful in this discussion because he wasn't elected. And so he can come at it from, from a couple of different standpoints there. And again, my name is Jake Milstein. One of the things I will do is I'll put my email address in the chat. If you have a question that you don't want to put in the chat, but you still want me to ask, I'll give you my email address, and of course, any follow up you can give to me. Speaking of that chat, go ahead and let us know where you're joining from. Always curious to know where people are. I'm in downtown Seattle today, and look forward to running this panel for you. All right, Mike, go for it.
Okay. All right. So, first of all, what we want to talk about is kind of a method for not only determining what your budget asks are going to be for security, but also to do an annual risk assessment. So it's just a good practice to go through an exercise like this every year. We'd love to help you do it. You're capable of doing it yourself. There is a little nuance to it. It's good if somebody walks you through it the first time. But hey, everybody is really facing, significant headwinds trying to get security funded in a time when everybody is being targeted by ransomware and extortion and business email compromise. In local governments, very specifically, it's really hard to hire people and hang on to them. Most of the time, IT gets tasked with security. And frankly, if somebody gets up to speed on security well enough, they're likely to leave and you're just going to start all over. One thing when I was at the city of Seattle that always kind of fought me was the sense of entitlement that everybody can use all this technology for anything they want to do while they're at work, Facebooking and Gmailing. And we were able to prove that 40% of the compromised assets in the city were due to the use of personal email. Um, The tendency has always been to prioritize preventive controls. So, that can be train your users, manage your vulnerabilities, filter your email, et cetera, et cetera. And there hasn't really been enough focus on the foreseeable event that is coming, regardless of whatever preventive controls you have in place, something's going to happen. And the ability to make that something happening into a tree falling in the forest depends on your monitoring, your ability to detect, your ability to respond and put out the grease fire on the stove before the house is engulfed in flames. So, when you're thinking about what are we going to need for security, there's more to it than firewalls. There's also this pervasive, especially in smaller jurisdictions, hey, they're not going to come after us. We don't have anything. Oh, yeah, you do. Oh, yeah, you do. You still make toilets flush. You still make water drinkable. And frankly, the criticality of those services makes you a great target. A lot of people think, hey, we're just going to buy insurance and call it good. Well, now insurance companies have become the universal regulator for everyone, because even to get that insurance, you're going to have to demonstrate your controls. And finally, it is a feature of government of all sizes that we manage by landmine. We will fix it if the situation gets out of control. That's when we will address it. And so all of these are headwinds. All of these are working against somebody like you trying to do the right thing, put controls in place, and not be that target. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Jake. So here's somebody who did it right so far, according to what we know now, and there may be more information coming. We think Dallas, from all the reports that I have read, really got in front of this thing correctly and really contained everything and prevented a lot worse situation than they're dealing with now. So they detected some aberrational traffic on the network. They said, we got to get in front of this. They quarantined it. The damage was restricted to a police website, and unfortunately, it's affected 911 dispatch. So it doesn't mean they cannot dispatch. It means they can't use computer-aided dispatch. Now, there's more to come out of here, because the question that comes to my mind right away is, if they snarled the CAD system, that means they had access to the CAD system. That means they had access to the records in the CAD system, and we may hear of another shoe to drop where they're being extorted for the records that are going to be under the purview of the Criminal Justice Information Services standard. So there may be more coming to this, but from all accounts, from everything I've read, did a great job of getting in front of this thing and making sure that the city didn't burn down. They didn't pay a ransom, so we've been told, and everything seemed to work. So what that means is they had good monitoring in place. They had eyes on. They saw something that happened. They had good emergency procedures that they fell back into right away, including incident response, but also including going back to basically paper and radio driven dispatch. So good on you, Dallas.
Well, so and before I go on, Mike, a question for you and for John here. So look, they did get hit by ransomware. It has had impacts. When you look at comments online, people are like, "Oh my God, couldn't they have prevented this?" I mean, the citizens of the city still believe Dallas didn't do a good job. So how do you, John, as an elected leader, as somebody who's run IT for a city, it seems like, in the grand scheme of things, Dallas has done a good job, but their citizens don't believe they have, because there have been issues. How do you deal with that?
Well, there's kind of a no-win deal, but I think transparency is really important. You've got to have very plausible, constant updates as to how things are progressing. Because, like Mike raised the question, was there exfiltration? So there could be extortion just for releasing information that's very confidential. So if that happens, they need to be upfront about it. I mean, yes, there's safety in numbers these days, but if you're not transparent, then you're more guilty than just the usual pack.
Yeah, and they'll take it out on you too.
Yeah. And that does raise another question. You talk about integration, so a lot of these CADs are integrated with other jurisdictions. Are they exposed?
Oh,
It's a
that's a
good
good
question to
question.
find out.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't think we know the answer to that. But Mike, as you see this, you're talking about it as a success story so far. Dallas is getting beat up in a bunch of places from people who don't know that bad things like this happen. Um, how do you think about it the same way John does? How do you think about it?
It's exactly what I said. Everybody wants to have this mindset of, hey, if we throw enough money at people at this problem, we will keep the bad guys out of the network. And that is not true. You have to be prepared to take a punch. And Dallas was prepared to take that punch. And that's the way I see it. And if there's lots of people out there who are doing a bunch of armchair quarterbacking, that's not something we're ever going to get away from. But if you are in the know and you know how these things go, you know that they did do a good job. So, I would debate anyone on that topic.
All right. Well, you may get to.
And they're up against that ticking clock of restoration, right? How quick can they
Yeah.
get it back up and running? And that's a whole nother question. Is your DR fast enough to get back online after you discover something?
Yep.
Whole nother
And,
question.
and there they may be beat up over that, maybe rightfully so. But, for the response that I've seen, I have no improvements that I would suggest. On the other hand, so here's how to do it wrong. Again, if all your budget asks, if everything that you think you're going to need is coming from a perspective of we will keep the bad guys out of the network, you're only so right. There's no way to stop somebody from picking up a USB stick in a parking lot and shoving it in a machine. There is no way to, again, in the public sector, to really regulate all of the internet surfing that goes on during the day, and the fact that somebody's going to run over, some injected website and have malware pushed on them. Getting people to give up passwords turns out to be fairly easy. I think the statistic is 75% of all these events start with some user action like giving up a password. So, everything you can do, put it all in place. That's not enough. You have to be ready to take that punch. So just go out and ask for, preventive controls. Hey, we need multi-factor authentication, zero trust, and all of these things. Okay. But you really, really need to focus on having a plan, making sure that you practice that plan, and get away from the whole, well, when it happens, then we'll fix everything mindset. All right. This is really how to do it wrong. And so, I'm really going to lean into this. Don't just plan on preventive controls and stop thinking that enough of those controls applied will keep everything safe, because it won't.
And I'm curious for folks in the audience, if you can put in the chat, how much of what you do is driven by external factors, like somebody read an article, or your insurance company telling you to do something, or those kinds of things, versus, hey, we're going to build a security program the way a security program should be built. I'm curious how you in the audience think about that.
Or your neighboring jurisdiction got smacked.
Right. Which is what happened. One of our customers all of a sudden got budget because they're a city, and a hospital nearby got hit, and all of a sudden there was budget for them.
Yep.
So, yep.
Yep, that's management almost by landmine. That's by your neighbor's landmine. Okay, so there are some differences now in, the whole product portfolio in the the cybersecurity product space. On the downside, the people are getting pretty burned out. Especially when we're talking about analysts, right? The people that are front lining, watching all the events going on in the network, trying to figure out what's real, what's not, what is severe enough that we need to initiate incident response. The job description for that position, for that role, says you're going to lose all the time, and so it has an effect on people, and they work very hard, and it's always a firefight. On the upside, the automation tools are starting to look pretty good. Security SOAR platforms, and these other automation tools to do things like automated quarantine. They're starting to hit their stride a bit, but I will remind everyone of the survey that Gartner did a few years ago of all of their customers and said, would you allow a piece of technology to take an action on your behalf without human oversight? And 100% of Gartner customers said no. That may be changing as we get closer to automation that looks like it's going to work. And when I say it's going to work, it can't be universal. There are things you can't turn off. There are things you cannot quarantine. You cannot quarantine an insulin pump, for example, or an infusion pump. On the upside, again, the artificial intelligence that we read about continuously that we can't get away from, Skynet is becoming self-aware, is getting baked into everything. And so when you combine automation with some artificial intelligence and it gets trained properly, we might get to a point where the technology can really take care of the first, 25% of the problems and then pass off to the humans what needs to be done by the humans. So are we there yet? Not quite, but we should be getting there fairly soon from everything that I read. Either that or the AI will kill us all. XDR and the other technologies that are becoming really good at doing things like quarantining that asset, they are becoming managed services. So there is that human oversight along with maybe a little bit of artificial intelligence baked into your EDR agent, but with that human to help make that decision, right? That's an area of the network that we're going to have to quarantine itself because that asset cannot be turned off, for example. So there are some new products. There's new ways to think about things. Zero trust is a big buzzword, and I didn't go to RSA, but RSA was back to 40,000 people overrunning San Francisco.
And everyone
And
talking about AI. And,
everyone talking about AI, zero trust, XDR, right? It's the buzzword, kind of fest that everybody goes to every year.
I don't know. I think
RSA.
zero trust is so last year. It is definitely the race is on now for AI, right? So I
I
think
think
this
you're
is
right.
part of what was happening with the heads of AI meeting with the heads of government in the other Washington, which is that the AI battle, you can't give out tools that are that easy to use for the hackers. You can't let your cloud AI stuff make it easy to build stuff that's really nasty. So
well, and
otherwise they'll just keep accelerating the pace, right? So yes, the tools will get more sophisticated. I mean, some cool stuff like really intelligent quarantining that's automated would be really nice.
I have,
But that
I,
can be outsmarted, right? If there's another AI going after it.
yeah, I have to imagine if zero trust is so last year, does that make it like -1 trust? But Fred and John, question for you about AI. I have to imagine we talked about external factors. Elected leaders coming and asking questions. Constituents asking questions. I have to imagine at this point, IT directors are getting questions of, hey, how are we using AI and what are our rules around AI, and hey, can't we just do security with AI? I know, Fred, you're starting to hear some of that stuff from folks.
Yeah, so we are in the absolute infancy of AI, and when people say AI, they need to separate really what they're talking about, because we've been using machine learning for at least 10 years, which is a form of AI. What we're talking about here is large language models, which is yet another form, and there are other forms. There's code generative AI, which is also becoming very useful. So it all depends. Now we got to get to the point where AI used to be like talking about the internet. It was one thing. Well, the internet's a billion things, and AI will be a billion things at some point. So it's the application of these tools. All of them have different purposes. If you're using large language models, it's usually about taking a lot of data and making sense of it relatively rapidly. Other things do other types of AI. So it all depends on where you apply it, but nobody is anywhere really to where it's game changing yet, but it will be.
Yeah, it's the rapid learning that's really the part of the large language model stuff. So you know how randomized hackers have gotten about different tools and different means for attack. To have something that can learn really fast on the fly is going to be extremely valuable.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about this NIST framework business, because everybody has heard of the NIST framework, and the federal government developed it for use by any size organization in any sector. And the reason it's so useful is because it's not prescriptive. It doesn't say have this control in place. It says make this outcome happen, right? It's an outcome based framework. So it's really easy to use. And if you turn it into a risk assessment method, because we remember risk is more than, hey, this control is missing. It's what the likelihood that something bad will happen because that control is missing, and what would the impact of that be. So we've turned this into a risk assessment sheet, and then we've added parts of this to establish maturity levels that you want. You can kind of arbitrarily pick what level you want to be, and then it will measure you against that. So we've improved its usefulness, but in the context of what we're talking about today, it's useful for a budgeting tool as well. So if you go through the NIST framework and it says, okay, remote access is managed, right? It doesn't say how to do that. You just say yes or no. We do manage remote access. Maybe it's, a vendor calls you on the phone, says open the firewall for me, and you do, and when they're done, you turn it off. Okay, well, if control outcomes cannot be met, then we say, okay, what's the likelihood? What's the impact? And it becomes a risk. All right. So we've identified our gaps, turn those into risk. For each risk, you assign a disposition. What are we going to do about this? Okay. You can accept the risk. Okay. 79 Ford Pinto blew up when they got rear ended. Ford said, it's okay. We'll pay off the dead people because it will cost too much to fix the car. They accepted the risk, and that is an unreasonable example, but that is allowable. You can avoid it, right? Turn off that Windows 2003 server that's facing the internet. You can mitigate, and that's where we're going with the budget here, which means that's through the application of controls that you're going to need resources for, or you can transfer it through insurance. That's all you can do with an identified risk: accept, avoid, mitigate, or transfer. So you assign a disposition to every one of the risks that you've identified, and then you determine how are you going to close that gap. So for example, if it's a piece of documentation you need, right? You need to have a documented recovery plan. Maybe somebody is just going to write that in your organization. So that's going to be delivered with an internal resource. Maybe you need to hire a consultant. Maybe you need to make a capital purchase, maybe a managed service. So you can pencil out how you are going to close these gaps, and then you can assign an estimate of what that will cost, either in terms of the number of hours of your resource, or a consulting engagement, or a capital cost plus 20% of that capital cost forever for maintenance fees. And all of a sudden, you have a risk assessment, which ticks off a compliance box. You've got your corrective action plan, and you know what it's going to cost. And so, a lot of you have biennial budgets. You could run this out as a 2-year roadmap every 2 years, and 2 years, do it all over again. So this is how we use this tool to do our risk assessment, our budgeting, and our corrective action plan. And we're happy to give you this tool. Like I said, you're fully capable of using this yourself. There is a little nuance to it, we might want to explain to you. It's better if somebody leads you through it the first time. We'd be happy to do that. And we will make that tool available.
Yeah,
So
and I put it in the chat. We'll email it out with a link after this, and then you can also set up time with Mike to walk you through it. I looked at it, and I want you to know that it would be helpful to have Mike walk you through it.
yeah. Okay, why don't you walk me through the next slide?
There you go.
Yeah. Okay, so here's what I meant about the modifications that we've made to just the NIST regulation. By the way, the next version of the NIST cybersecurity framework is coming out. In today's version, there are these domains of identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. They're adding one for governance, which is super important, because when you identify a risk and you want to get it resourced, the way to get it done is, and John can comment on this very directly, you make sure that there is some kind of executive committee that adjudicates your requests for resources, so that you get fingerprints on things. And because executives may say, we will accept that risk. That's fine. That's on you. You made the decision. You know, as our committee, as our governance committee, we brought all this to you. And if you're deciding you're going to accept that risk, that's fine.
Yeah,
We also
the assessment
want
is
to talk about that.
the assessment's got like a two-part. First part of it is you got to get your staff in the boat. They've got to see the gaps and the risks and really be behind it. And then the second part is exactly what you're talking about, which is governance, which is now you got to take this into the executive and you've got to run it up the pole. In a lot of cases, you got to start with the finance director. And so you have to convince them in a way that's not as technical as what you're using to convince your team, but it shows the risk, right? And then eventually it becomes political because they're deciding how much we're going to spend on parks and how much we're going to spend on administration. And nobody likes to see a big administration cost. But the risk of losing assets they've already invested in, it's definitely got to be illustrated. And this is a good tool to do that.
Yeah, and again, we've added this maturity feature to it. So if this means anything to you, and you are trying to see improvement over time, you can set. So here I've arbitrarily set maturity level to 3, which I think is probably the peak of where local governments can credibly get. Level 5, not even Lockheed can get to level 5. And you know, Fred and I have been in lots of places where they work with maturity models, and it's frankly getting all the way to level 5 is really not achievable. But so again, what pops out of this, if you have decided to mitigate some of these gaps that you've identified and these risks you've identified, it gives you this list of them. Okay, so here's typical. This actually came out of an engagement we did for somebody. And so here's the 2-year roadmap that we've run out and what it's going to cost, without the detail of everything that goes in there, because we can't expose that stuff. There's an internal cost as well, because if you are doing security right, there is the governance organization that we talked about, and that's going to take some time, and you really need to report up to executives. It is important that you have rituals for things like vulnerability management. Somebody's going to have to be in charge of that. So there are programmatic costs that come with it as well. But here are the corrective actions: 0 to 6 months, 6 months to a year, 1 year to 2 years, right? Because this was for a biennial budget and this ran it out for 2 years. So right there, those are your budget asks. Now, because the state local cyber grant program is coming, theoretically, I've heard the state is planning, something is going on. It's completely opaque. Okay. But assuming that that's going to happen, and there are a number of things that you're going to be able to buy off the grant, this method can also be used to justify those grant requests, right? Those resource requests for the grant, because it needs to be backed up by some kind of assessment. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Jake. Here is an example of what I mean by your management of a security program, right? So if you're doing it right, there are things you do every week. Yeah, there are things that are completely interrupt driven, right? If an incident comes up, stop what you're doing, because that's what you're going to be working on. If there are consultants in there, you're going to have to manage the consultants. There are vulnerability scans that need to be conducted, reviewed, compared to what is on your risk register. You're going to have to do proper record keeping, especially if you are under some kind of audit. This is really important for CGIS, PCI, and HIPAA examinations that local governments may get. Quarterly. Really, the thing about quarterly is every quarter, a couple of the annual things need to be ticked off the list. So, for example, what are we doing this quarter? We're doing our annual policy review, tabletop exercise, and penetration test this quarter. That's us. So every quarter, a couple of these big rocks need to be addressed. All of this needs to be managed. And again, some of that is just managing other resources to do the things, and some of it maybe sit down and you're going to pencil out the policies or whatever. So this is the matrix of doing it right here. Anybody want to comment on this?
Yeah, so this is,
by the way, CISO is a horrible job. Let me just tell you.
Right. Marching orders for your crew, obviously. and you'll find if you're new to this, if you haven't really done a lot of this, you're going to find like it takes several laps to get everything. So, for example, you're just going to go through and look at your firewall rules. There's going to be a lot of, I didn't know that was open, or why is that open? And then you got to dig into why it got left open. And then a year later, it's something else that well, how did that get there? It has to be constant. Unfortunately, it's the nature of the game because everybody's stack is constantly changing.
Mike, keep going. Oh, Fred, this is yours.
Yeah, so that's a perfect segue for us to talk about the people component. There we go. Finally advanced. So as you can see, there's a whole world of things that are programmatic that you need to do that have nothing to do with operating the infrastructure, responding to incidents, all these other things that jump in and are part of your responsibilities as well. Just running your controls, the technical controls, can be a full-time job for multiple people on your staff. So we're going to talk about the challenges. Really, we're going to try to focus on the things we want you to think about whenever you're building your budget. So never enough staff to meet needs. So you really need to understand how to balance where your assistance for your program comes from. So there's a balance of internal people. You probably need some consulting occasionally. You may need some professional services to come in and maybe do some implementation type work. And you may need a managed service because most organizations don't want to have a 24/7, 365 operation. That's the real killer for information security. The bad guys don't sleep. You need to be able to respond at 3 a.m. on Saturday. And if your organization is not built to do that, and you have not built a team that has 3 shifts that goes round the clock and has coverage for vacations, then you're going to have to outsource a component of your organization. That's what managed services are built for. We think it's utterly essential that municipalities, local government, public sector organizations focus heavily on building an organization that understands how to use managed services effectively. The other real challenge is when you're going out and getting people, who do you hire? Who do you want to look for? What skills are you looking for? And it tends to be you need to hire for the basic security functions. We saw policy up there, right? How much the work was policy related. Vulnerability management, which is partly technical, but is partly process. Making sure your systems are configured in a secure manner. Firewalls, data loss prevention, because usually you have to know your own data to do that well. And certainly access management.
Webinar going on.
You're going to spend a ton of your time managing access, right? So we also need to think about, let's think about outsourcing one-time activities, not just these continuous ones. So, and there's salary pressure. People, if you're in a public sector role, you're probably going to not have the budget that people who are looking for the most in-demand job there is, security assistants, they're going to try to hire them away. So you have this challenge, right, on not maybe being able to hire the highest tier of security talent internally, unless you're really talented at working with your organization and building those roles. Next slide, please.
Yeah, it's funny. I want to double down on something you said there, which is, I was just at a public sector conference, and one of the fellas at a city here in Washington was telling me every time he trains somebody up, Microsoft comes and hires them. That they watch that city to see who's being trained up. And then hire somebody away. So, I mean, it's a real problem. But I guess a question for you on there, Fred, is as the economy shifts here and people, tech is right now a little uneven, there are layoffs in tech. Do you see that changing? Do you see it being easier to recruit people to cities and counties and transit districts and water districts, which I would think would be more stable?
Well, I think right now is probably a golden opportunity to go out and grab those people and look. Here's my suggestion: go find people that have spent time in the trenches at the private sector, and they're ready to be in a more stable environment where they can work in their, potentially even in the town where they live, and secure their own life. So I think there's something to be said for finding people that are in a place in their career where this appeals to them, and they're doing it for the mission as much as they're doing it for the salary.
Yeah,
I
I mean,
mean,
I know.
IT hiring it's a dark art, okay, a light art. In any case, it's an important thing, and it's really elusive to build a team that's a learning organization. So most jurisdictions, yeah, you can't get a fully baked InfoSec person. You can't afford it. So you're gonna have to create your own. And then you of course get stuck being the farm club for the big leagues. So you really have to build your team like a learning organization where it's everybody's job to learn InfoSec, and you're always helping the next person up who comes in. So if you got a new desktop person, you're grooming them into InfoSec roles. It's a kind of different way to look at it, but that's the nature of the beast, right? You can't afford Amazon salaries or whatever is going on out there.
Yep. All right.
Right.
Let me hit the
Next
next
slide.
slide
Yeah,
here.
we've been talking a lot about that actually at other meetings, conferences, and things like that, and how we internally develop talent and hold on to them, and that mission focus has a lot to do with it. But the opportunities for advancement and learning other roles in cybersecurity. I want to be a pen tester, I want to be an operations engineer, et cetera, et cetera. That really is effective.
So let's talk about the dirty secret of the hardware and software security industry is that so much of what gets sold ends up being shelfware. And there's a very simple reason for that, because running and operating your own controls and solutions is very, very difficult, has many components. Some of them are one time, so they're CapEx. Some things are OpEx. First thing you need to know is if you've got particular security technology, it always requires SME talent. None of this stuff is easy for somebody who's never done it before to learn how to do it, and maybe even a mountain too high for anyone without experience to climb. So if you're going to put things into your budget, hardware and software, make sure you have the talent to get the value out of it, or it will become shelfware, or somebody will work on it every day, keeping it running without getting any real return on your investment. You got to remember that you have CapEx costs and implementation. Getting these things to where they're providing value can take a year sometimes for some of these services. You want to have a way to get these things providing value as quickly as possible, and understanding what those costs are and including them in the process are key. And then there's training, right? How do people stay current on using these tools? Well, usually they got to be trained on a relatively regular basis. Things to keep in mind that when you do finally go and have sunk costs, you're locking yourself into particular directions. Understand that sometimes using a managed service first, understanding whether that is for you, that approach, before you may potentially go out and try to build it and staff that yourself, may be a stepwise way to avoid getting locked in and having sunk costs in old technologies. Because again, when you buy something, you're putting a stake in the ground saying, this is where we want to stake our current maturity level. Well, this is a fast moving area. Everything got AI in the last 2 weeks. Every security product all of a sudden has AI now. So adding this whole concept of, oh my, we're already behind an entire generation within a week. Boy, that's a hard race to be in.
This is one of my favorite slides. And this slide actually is valid, like going back a decade in IT, as far as these vendors who want to create SMEs that have to drink the Kool-Aid because it's a part of their vendor lock-in. Instead of common UI, styles and usability that's standard across a certain niche, whether it's security tools or a finance system or whatever. No, they have to go off on their own. And healthcare's got the same problem. So it's really hard to avoid getting too much lock-in on these things.
Yeah.
Because their incentives are to lock you in. So you really have to think about it when you make those purchases.
There you go. There is money out there for some of this. The Department of Homeland Security funding that has some grants out there is perfect for CapEx. If we need the types of essentials we do recommend, you probably purchase on your own: a firewall, endpoint detection and response, probably a log management solution. Maybe that's a managed solution. Certainly email security needs to be in there. So look for these foundational things if you don't have them in place. And if you do have those in place, then look for that one-time spending around things like annual assessments, making sure your IR plan and tabletop exercise are being current and operated. Make sure your policies, pen tests, your vulnerability assessment, all those one-time things are happening. So let's go to the OpEx slide here, and we can kind of get to the last piece of this budgeting puzzle. Again, that's the same question I asked on the slide before, but we're going to talk about the other components of this. People forget what it means to maintain this and to operate it, right? So maintaining means keeping the patches on it, keeping it up to date, keeping signatures up to date. Operations is this thing broke. What do we do? How do we fix it? What happens when we have some system that is feeding it data that is not operating? We got to fix that. You need SMEs to actually use these tools. Like I said, you need to be sometimes an expert on a very specific platform to actually get the value out of it. You may be able to do rudimentary stuff, but to really get the value you're paying for, you need experts. And then there's subscription costs people forget about. I need to feed threat intelligence every day into this system. So I have to also pay for a subscription for threat intelligence to make this tool I bought useful. Look at total cost of ownership, whatever you're going to go out and look at software or hardware purchases, because there is OpEx built into every CapEx purchase like that. Outsourcing services, this is the key. I think in almost, unless you're a Fortune 500 company, just about everybody right now is reaching out and outsourcing a component. The things that make sense are the things that are 24/7, 365. That's the things you don't want to do. Or it's something that, wow, this is really a highly technical skill. I don't want to go out and hire somebody that has this high-tech skill, but I only use them 50% of the time at that. What do I do with this highly skilled person the other 50% of the time? Well, maybe it's better to go outsource that kind of management. So look at that for things like managed detection and response, or as is becoming now, managed XDR. There's a confluence of those terms. Log management, VA, zero trust now is something that is outsourceable. I would suggest, if you're thinking about zero trust, it is a constellation of controls. It is not a thing. It is 10 things that need to be integrated. Outsourcing your professional services, of course. Phishing as a service. This is a subscription. This is OpEx. You pay this every year. We're doing either annual training or quarterly phishing, or maybe we're going to pay for an instant response retainer every year because we want to have that help when things go wrong. And there's cyber insurance. Okay, that might be one of the bases now of your operational expenditures. I got to pay for a policy. So all these things, you need to take all these things into account in a real holistic view of your budget, or you're going to end up with a hole and you're going to end up losing the value. You spent all this money in your budget. You're not going to realize the benefits of that expenditure.
And, and I know, John, you and I have talked previously about, cyber insurance and what you need to outsource and all of that. You danced that when you were a CIO at Issaquah, what to outsource and what not to.
Yeah. And, there's a tendency in larger cities to like, well, we can do everything in-house here. Well, it's just not really true anymore. So everybody has to really consider this. And then the blend it has a lot to do with, how big are you? How good is your retention of staff? If you're talking about a smaller suburban city, this is a very important slide here of outsourcing stuff that just has to get done. You may have a revolving door of staff, but if you're outsourcing the critical stuff, like your management detection and all that, that makes a big difference in how you sleep at night. It is an ongoing cost, so that's a different framework than IT traditionally was, which was just buy servers and then the staff deals with it. So, if you haven't got to that point with your finance department, you're going to have to educate them that we're moving to a subscription world. Microsoft's already done that if you're using their products.
Yep, for sure.
Everything's kind of moving that way, and the CapEx stuff is less obvious than it used to be.
Yeah, for sure. Fred,
I think
procurement.
this is Mike.
Oh, Mike, is this yours, procurement?
Yeah. So procurement in the public sector is nightmarish. Let me just say. I mean, and I've been on both sides of the desk, and just the efforts to put a committee together who's going to do the scoring and write the RFP and handle the QA period and make sure everybody meets all the requirements and do the scoring and have an apparent successful vendor, and that may get challenged. That is a really expensive process. So I'm hoping that everybody is aware of the different kinds of vehicles that can make things easier to buy and also cheaper to buy, because every time you run an RFP process, you're blowing up the cost of something. So GPOs, group purchasing organizations, what do we got? Synex, Omnia, what are some others? One GPO,
One G, yeah, one. I think it's one
GPA,
GPA. Yeah, one
GPA.
GPA. Vizient, Provista. Vizient is hospitals, but Provista actually has cities and universities and a bunch of other things like that. So yeah, there are
Yeah.
a bunch out there.
Yeah. So
NASPO.
NASPO, exactly. So, right, these are, if your procurement people are enlightened, they will turn to these to try and avoid going through a big process. And if not, you may want to make sure that you're helping them be aware. Cooperative purchasing language. If there is a competitively won, if somebody won a contract through an RFP process, is completely competitively won, you can request that the language go into that contract for cooperative purchasing so that any other jurisdiction basically can piggyback off that contract. And that's a great way to go. There's always the sole source method, which turns out to be kind of tricky. It's useful in emergencies. I remember, I forget the jurisdiction that it happened to, and if I could remember, I probably wouldn't tell you the name, but there was a jurisdiction that got hit with ransomware, and right away they said, just go buy whatever you have to buy. Right? They just waived the whole competitive procurement thing. So in an emergency, sole source can work. If you overuse sole source, eventually the state auditor is going to be around asking questions. Generally, when you are trying to buy something using a GPO, right, one of these purchasing vehicles, rather than a complete RFP, you can just go to the RFQ, RFI, just get some bids and then pick that way. That is certainly a way to circumvent a lengthy process. And if all else fails, you got to go competitive and you got to go the RFP route. So,
And Mike and Fred and John, in your experience, when organizations do an RFP, it takes a long time. Do they end up getting a better product that's cheaper? Does it work? John?
Depends on your project manager or yourself if you're the project manager, because it's definitely working with coordinating a bunch of goats and sheep and trying to get them to all cooperate and select something is not easy.
I mean, I know I was talking to somebody who ran an RFP process, and they ended up picking the cheapest thing, and it didn't, in the end, do what they needed it to do. So, and Fred, I know you've seen that.
Yeah, well, we see a lot of these RFPs now. Instead of having 6, 8, 10 vendors, they have 100 vendors applying. I don't really know of any RFP process that's going to take that volume and probably come up with the best vendor. They'll come up with a vendor that meets the requirements, probably of the scoring system. Is that going to be the best one in particular for what is probably a major contract? It's a crap.
Well, there's another inherent flaw in the whole RFP process too. Here's Thomas is agreeing about the nightmarishness of the RFP process. But your committee that's going to do the scoring is pulled from across agencies. And so you're going to be asking somebody who works in HR to understand what a good response looks like for some kind of cyber product or service. I mean, that's so just by virtue of the way that the whole thing is run, you're likely to get something other than the perfect fit.
Yeah, we'll pick the solution that has the Super Bowl ad, right?
Yeah, Yeah, we try to avoid RFPs wherever possible. I mean, you can't really for big CapEx decisions, but the GPOs, the state has some pretty good vehicles for Washington
Yep.
State. And that's if everybody goes, oh, we have no choice but an RFP. It's that you just hear the collective groan from the IT staff
Yeah,
because
and
the
one,
time invested. Yeah,
I mean, one of the things I know, when I joined this company, one of the things that Mike said to me was we have to become easy for public sector organizations to buy because, otherwise you're forcing them into a nightmarish process. So, we have all of
We
those.
feel your pain.
Yeah, yeah.
Your pain is our pain.
All right, now I do want to get to AI because we talked about it before. We get a lot of questions about it. All right, guys, how do we think about AI here?
I think that every conversation devolves into talking about AI lately. That's what I think about it. So obviously there are some uses. We've had a discussion recently with a city who is considering using it as a chatbot, so that rather than a human interacting with someone who's asking questions, what they're going to do is they're going to take the equivalents, the AI equivalent, and they're going to train it on all their internal documents. And the warning there is this is going to get gamed by people who want the city to embarrass itself. For sure. We all know that there are the public disclosure people out there that are constantly looking for ways to embarrass a public sector organization, and that is likely. So be careful what you train it with. Um, it to me, it's just becoming embedded in all of these products. And so anytime when, for example, our managed service, we are managing endpoints, those we inherit all of the AI that they have going on, which just makes the alerts that come off those endpoints of higher fidelity. So it's good that it's kind of just showing up everywhere, and if we don't go all the way out to the endpoint, Skynet Terminator, and we have AI built into things that will essentially develop a baseline of your average behavior and then alert if something aberrational happens, that's great. I have seen it suggested that you could feed it sim logs and say, okay, I just gave you 10,000 log lines here. Tell me what happened. And if you train it that way, it might work. Obviously, security code reviews to find vulnerabilities in code. And I think this is a really interesting suggestion from Fred that in 5 years, this could be the first line SOC analyst. You could just be throwing all of the logs and events at it, and AI in a chair doing the work of an analyst, I guess. But we've all heard about what the bad guys are doing, and they are highly motivated, numerous, and well-resourced to be doing this kind of research to see how this is going to pay off for them. And I do mean pay off. So we've seen malware be written by a chatbot. It's coming up with better phishing bait because it's probably because the chatbot's first language is English. And then doing the same thing that the good guys would do, identify vulnerabilities in code, but this for a bad purpose. So, these are the kind of things that I see where AI is going to kind of bump up on information security without, the whole, let expand the conversation to be all about, AI gaining sentience and how it's going to kill us all.
So, Fred, some ways for state and local governments and utilities, transit districts to save money using AI, and some dangers.
Yeah. Well, here's what I would say is I would not go out and try to purchase an AI solution because you need to develop all the uses, the protections, the controls, everything around that. As Mike said, think of it as something embedded in the products you're going to buy. And think of this also in terms of the hype cycle, or the same way you would about the year of PKI 20 years ago. Well, PKI is everywhere. Yeah, they were right, but it's not like it changed the world overnight. It's like 7 years ago. Machine learning. If your product didn't have machine learning, you're out the door. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere now. Machine learning is just an embedded technology now. AI is going to be the same thing. So while it will change things, it is not going to change the fact that we're going to be fighting the bad guys just 24/7, 365, just like we've been doing for as long as I've been doing this.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
I'm looking forward to a chat bot based on public comments hallucinating. And won't that be a special moment?
That's funny.
Hey, a couple of quick notes here as we get to the end of the hour. My colleague Ginny is going to put a link in the chat for the survey. We do a survey at the end of every digital event we do. We want your opinion. How was this? Was this helpful? And there's also a way you can get in touch with us in there. Also, for every survey somebody takes, we make a donation to the Society for Information Management, or you can get or we donate them on your behalf. So we would really appreciate you taking it. Quick about us. We provide cybersecurity as a service. So on the left-hand side is, everything to do with events here. So incident preparedness, getting ready for an event with tabletop, that 24/7 threat detection investigation we were talking about, no matter what your environment, and then incident response. We take action on your network, should you need it from the SOC, or you can meet us the way that we never want to meet anybody, which is to call at 1 a.m. We pick up the line and we can help you with incident response. On the right, the thing on the top here, policy creation, and the risk assessment is a lot of what we talked about in this last hour, of course, is, hey, let's, doing a risk assessment, building policy around it, and building your roadmap is absolutely something we can help with. And of course, one of the things, I know a lot of you already signed up for Mike's daily security blast. You can do it on our website, criticalinsight.com. And we provide free security awareness training every other Friday. All of those things you can, in fact, this Friday we're doing it. So, ways to get in touch with us. And Mike's email address is there, as is mine. So one of the things Mike talked about earlier was that that budgeting spreadsheet that he's put together. We're going to send it out. If you want to book some time on Mike's calendar to have him walk you through it, we're going to put a link to book some time with us in the chat here. You can book that, or we'll email it to you, and you can just email back and let us know what time works for you. And we'll make Mike make that fit in his calendar, because that's what we do.
Yeah, good luck.
All right, guys, let's do some final thoughts here. John, let's start with you. You've been in both seats, the elected leader. When you think about budgeting this year, what are your final thoughts for folks?
Well, get in the room with leadership, and start by protecting existing investments. Run government like a business. That's how enterprise organizations do it. IT is in the room. And build a learning organization, because, that's the only way to survive with all these tools changing and staff turnover.
For sure. Fred, final thoughts.
Yeah, budgeting is a gigantic balancing act. So you got to make sure that you're taking into account everything and the potential implications of where you're spending your budget, so you don't end up buying a bunch of stuff and not being able to get value out of it.
Mike, final thoughts.
Yeah, this process for risk assessment and budgeting is extremely important to use, because you are going to be able to justify your requests based on alignment with the framework that's supposed to be there exactly for that. In addition, you'll get ahead of the curve, because when it comes time to make your grant requests, and I'm assuming that this is all going to happen and it's taken a long time, you need a justification for that, and that justification needs to be, we assessed ourselves and found this to be a deficiency. So use the tool, and it'll pay off for you.
All right, everybody, we'll email that out. We really appreciate you all being here with us today. Again, take that survey. We always want your opinions. Thank you so much to John for joining us, and of course for Mike and Fred. And James says, are we going to send out the PowerPoint? Yes, we will send out the PowerPoint and the the Excel spreadsheet Mike was talking about. All right, everybody, have a great day. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you in the next webinar. Talk to you soon.
See you
Bye-bye.
later.
Thanks, everyone.